Everything seemed like smooth sailing for Rachel Zegler at first. She had burst into Hollywood on a wave of praise for her stellar voice and undeniable screen presence. Audiences and critics alike were calling her the next big thing, someone destined to captivate hearts for years to come. Then, out of nowhere, something peculiar happened. The very role that was supposed to crown her the ultimate Disney princess ended up dragging her name into one controversy after another. Most people assumed her live-action Snow White would be a slam dunk, an instant classic that would cement her growing reputation. Instead, it propelled her into the eye of a storm that left many wondering if her once promising career could implode at any moment. The question remains, did Rachel's unapologetic voice spark overdue progress or ignite the fuse of her own downfall? Because as you'll soon see, the turbulence surrounding her casting in Snow White turned into an unraveling saga, one marked by fiery criticism, social media outrage, boycotts, and accusations that forced Disney executives into frantic damage control. And yet, the story runs much deeper than a single movie. It reveals the undercurrents of an ever-evolving Hollywood, where tradition collides with the demands of modern audiences. But Rachel's predicament didn't start and end with a few quotes about the old Snow White. Hers is a story of how quickly the internet can turn adoration into scorn. And to truly understand the fallout, you need to see how a chain reaction of events, some personal, some political, pulled her into a level of controversy nobody could have predicted. And that's just scratching the surface. When Disney announced their plans to remake Snow White, the world held its breath in anticipation. Who would land the iconic role famously described as having skin as white as snow? The answer arrived in June of 2021, and it was Rachel Zegler, a talented Latina performer best known for her breakout performance in another high-profile musical production. Immediately, keyboard warriors and earnest fans alike flooded social media, questioning if Rachel's heritage clashed too strongly with the fairy tale's original description. Snow White's pale skin was, after all, central to both the name and the story's iconography for decades. Many critics felt that Disney had drifted too far from tradition, while others celebrated the casting as an inclusive step that might give a timeless tale a fresh spin. Rachel herself didn't stay silent. She fired back, explaining how the role of Snow White had resonated with Spanish-speaking audiences for generations. Why shouldn't she represent that connection? She pointed out that, at its core, Snow White's story is about kindness, resilience, and innocence, qualities that extend far beyond complexion. But what truly intrigued people was the later reveal that Rachel hadn't been the only Latina in the final mix. Another actress, Renata Vaca, said she'd been neck and neck with Rachel for the part, and that the open casting call had never specified a certain look or ethnicity. According to Renata, the audition process focused more on singing, ability, and exuding a sense of classic Disney princess magic. If anything, it proved Disney was willing to reimagine the fairy tale's traditional identity. All this could have ended as a harmless casting debate, yet what started as minor grumblings soon snowballed. People online argued over whether changing Snow White's ethnicity undermined the original folklore. Some claimed the story's entire premise was built around her complexion. Others argued that the heart of Snow White transcended 19th century European norms. In hindsight, that initial wave of discussion seems almost quaint compared to the uproar that followed, because once Rachel began sharing her own modern takes on the 1937 classic, the outrage reached a whole new level, and that was only the beginning. Things escalated fast when Rachel turned her gaze toward the original animated Snow White. In several interviews, she didn't hold back her critiques. She called the original story outdated, lampooning Snow White's central quest for romantic rescue by a prince who, in her words, bordered on stalker behavior. At the D23 Expo, she spelled it out plainly: "It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that isn't going to be saved by a prince." She's not dreaming about true love, she declared. Some people found this refreshing. Finally, a heroine with agency and modern values. But to others, it felt like sacrilege. They saw her comments as a direct insult to the original animators, the legacy of Walt Disney, and the sweet charm that made the classic film so enduring. All the decades of nostalgia came roaring back, pushing many fans to lash out in defense of the original. Suddenly, columns and opinion pieces swarmed the internet, accusing Rachel of harboring disdain for the very story she was paid to bring to life. Branding experts jumped in, insisting that she'd missed the mark on how to address legacy Disney properties, especially one older than most living audiences. In the midst of the chaos, David Hand, the son of the original Snow White co-director, found her modern spin downright offensive. In one pointed interview, he said Walt Disney and his father would be spinning in their graves if they witnessed the controversial direction the remake was taking. But Rachel's words struck a chord with more than just hardcore Disney fans. Others seized upon her remarks as proof of an unrestrained feminist agenda, lambasting her for ruining a classic that, in their opinion, didn't need reimagining. The debate set off a cultural tug-of-war. Was a 1937 story truly relevant as it was, or was it overdue for a 21st century upgrade? Yet as the digital dust swirled, a totally separate conflict emerged. One that had little to do with dwarfs or magic mirrors, but had everything to do with global politics and the uncertain stance of the film's biggest stars. Little did anyone realize how much more complicated it was about to get. Behind the scenes, Disney was pushing forward with production, trying to stay calm under mounting criticism. It certainly didn't help that the film's evil queen was played by Gal Gadot, known for her Israeli background and mandatory service in the Israeli Defense Forces. Once promotional material started circulating in August of 2024, pro-Palestinian groups demanded a boycott, pointing to Gadot's vocal support for Israel. The situation became doubly explosive when old social media posts emerged showing Rachel Zegler's support for Palestine. Suddenly, the lead heroine and the story's villain stood on polar opposite sides of a real-world geopolitical conflict. The film's narrative itself seemed overshadowed by this reality. Trending hashtags promoting a boycott, calls for protests, and a swirl of digital vitriol that had far more to do with world affairs than a fairy tale. Remarkably, Rachel and Gal got along just fine on set, or so insiders reported. There were no horror stories of backstage tension. Even so, the public fixated on the contradiction between the film's main actress championing one side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the villainess championing the other. Neither Disney nor its stars could prevent the internet from turning the conflict into a swirling hurricane of heated opinions. By the time the 2024 US presidential election results came in, yet another storm brewed around Rachel. Frustrated by the outcome, she posted an incendiary message suggesting that former President Donald Trump and his supporters never know peace. Outrage erupted immediately among conservative circles, some of whom had already taken issue with her political stances. They called for a boycott of the movie, accusing her of insulting half the nation's voters. Though Rachel scrambled to apologize, the damage was done. Those outraged by her words had already begun sounding the alarm, proclaiming that she was un-American and that Disney was complicit in endorsing her. All the while, Disney executives found themselves knee-deep in a fiasco. From accusations of political correctness gone wild to claims that the film had become a mouthpiece for divisive discourse, the once simple story of a princess fleeing an evil queen was now overshadowed by real-world clashes of ideology. But just when it seemed like the film was drowning in enough controversy, a whole new uproar broke out. For many, the identity of the Seven Dwarfs has always been at the heart of Snow White. Even as remakes tried to modernize story elements, the dwarfs remained an unshakable core. Except this time, the conversation about the dwarfs wasn't so cheerful. Way back in January 2022, Peter Dinklage, famous for his roles challenging stereotypes around dwarfism, called Disney out for rehashing a fairy tale he viewed as hopelessly antiquated. He argued the entire premise was demeaning, and that if Disney truly wanted a progressive spin, they should reconsider how they portray characters with dwarfism altogether. In response, Disney promised they would handle the dwarfs more sensitively. Yet in July 2023, leaked photos from the Snow White set in Berkshire revealed a group of performers. 6 were average-height, ethnically diverse actors, with only one actor confirmed to have dwarfism among them. Social media erupted. Instead of championing performers with dwarfism, it looked like Disney had sidestepped them almost entirely, presumably to avoid offensive stereotypes. Dwarf actors like Jason "Wee-Man" Acuna publicly lamented the missed opportunities. Others blasted Peter Dinklage, holding him partially responsible for scaring Disney away from giving multiple dwarfs roles in the movie. By October 2023, Disney tried to quell the backlash by unveiling fully CGI dwarfs, each sporting the classic C's names: Doc, Sneezy, Grumpy, and so on, but carefully avoiding the term dwarfs in any promotional material. This decision only fueled more resentment. Fans saw it as a half-baked attempt to hush critics while also erasing any real dwarfs from the film. Suddenly, both tradition lovers and progressive audiences seemed united in disappointment, each feeling that Disney had missed the mark. But even that monumental debate didn't settle the trouble for Snow White. There was more yet to come. When the film finally premiered, the numbers and reviews streamed in, and they were anything but glowing. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film languished at around 40% approval from critics. Metacritic gave it a 50 out of 100, marking it as a middling production that neither soared nor plummeted with epic flair. Some critics found sparks of creativity in the concept, while others declared it a puzzling mashup of conflicting ideas. A few reviewers praised Rachel's vocal abilities, saying she imbued her songs with emotional depth. Others lauded her attempt to modernize a character often criticized for being too passive. Yet for every positive note, there were far more voices complaining about inconsistent tone, pacing issues, and the movie's apparent identity crisis. Some described it as if Disney wanted to break from the original formula, while still clutching onto that 1937 magic, and ended up pleasing no one. Many cited the dwarfs controversy specifically as a microcosm of the film's larger flaw, an overcorrection that managed to anger both defenders of the classic approach and advocates for inclusive storytelling. Critics also noted how the real-world political stances of its two female leads overshadowed the actual plot. It was tough to enjoy the whimsical realm of castles, magic mirrors, and forest creatures, while being constantly reminded of the behind-the-scenes friction. A handful of writers tried to see the silver lining. They argued that any attempt to modernize a film as old and cherished as Snow White would inevitably face resistance. But that argument didn't quell the harsh verdict from those who said the movie lacked the essence that made Disney's earliest creations so enchanting. Furious commenters online, meanwhile, were merciless. Some hammered the production for going woke, while others condemned Disney for not going woke enough. And in the center of it all, Rachel Zegler's reputation took a beating, to the point where many Hollywood observers openly wondered if she'd ever recover from the fallout. But the question now looming over everything was, what happens next? What started as an exciting, progressive recasting for an old fairy tale spiraled into one of Disney's most polarizing projects to date. Rachel Zegler, once heralded as the next big Hollywood sensation, found herself branded as the reason everything went awry. Fair or not, some argued she was simply a convenient scapegoat for a movie that was destined to struggle under the weight of conflicting social and political demands. Others claimed her uncompromising opinions, combined with a sometimes brash way of expressing them, had sabotaged her own success. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Rachel may have approached the press with a zeal that inadvertently scorched any chance for graceful dialogue. Meanwhile, Disney underestimated the emotional attachment people still have for a beloved 1937 animated film and miscalculated how to repackage a fairy tale for a deeply divided era. The aftermath leaves us with a series of nagging questions. Will audiences forgive and forget, giving Rachel a second chance in future roles? Or has she become so polarizing that major studios will hesitate to cast her, fearing another avalanche of bad press? And with Disney now aware that even well-intentioned updates can backfire spectacularly, might they approach their legacy remakes with more caution, or perhaps abandon the concept altogether? Rachel has hinted that she regrets some remarks that came off harsher than intended, yet the internet rarely allows for easy redemption arcs. Public perception can shift quickly, and sometimes celebrities re-emerge stronger than ever after enough time passes. But the sting from Snow White's failure will linger, especially considering the swirl of political and cultural chaos that accompanied it. In a broader sense, Rachel Zegler's ordeal reflects the precarious state of stardom in our modern age. One moment, you're the talented newcomer adored for your vocal range and authenticity. The next, every interview or tweet can be dissected by millions, turning good intentions into career-threatening controversies. Even the mightiest brand in family entertainment, Disney, found itself caught in the crossfire, fumbling to placate an audience pulled in opposite directions by tradition and progress. Now, as the credits roll on this complicated chapter of Hollywood history, one thing is certain: Snow White's journey doesn't end at happily ever after this time. For Rachel Zegler, the final page remains unwritten, her fate uncertain in the wake of a story that left no one fully satisfied. Whether she can rise above the uproar, forging a new path in the cutthroat world of show business, is the next big question, one that only time and perhaps a more forgiving public can answer.